A poor girl holds a rag and asks the billionaire, "Would you hire me? I need a job to buy milk for my brother." His answer changed her life. The winds howled like wild beasts that night. Rain lashed against the windows of the Calloway mansion, perched on a hill overlooking the city. While the storm turned the streets into rivers and forced everyone to seek shelter, Henry Calloway went through contracts in his private office, oblivious to nature's chaos outside. At 52, Henry had built an empire. His name was synonymous with power, respected in financial circles across the country. His angular face, always set in a serious expression, rarely broke into a smile. In fact, few could recall the last time they saw him show any emotion besides calculated coldness or contained irritation. "Sir, more coffee?" asked Wilson, his butler of over 20 years, and perhaps the only person who knew at least a few of the layers behind that impenetrable man. "Yes. And check to make sure all the windows are closed. This storm doesn't look like it'll let up anytime soon." Wilson nodded and left silently, as he always did. Henry returned to the figures on his screen, adjusting the reading glasses he used only for close work. The grandfather clock on the wall read 10:47 p.m. On nights like this, he preferred to work late. The silence of the empty mansion matched the solitude he had chosen as his companion over the years. That was when the soft, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. At first, he thought it was just the storm, but soon he recognized it. Faint knocks on the front door. Tentative, weak, as if whoever was knocking didn't really want to be heard. Henry frowned. Who would show up at his door on a night like this? His phone hadn't rung to announce any visitors, and he wasn't expecting anyone. Wilson will handle it, he thought, turning his attention back to the documents. But his concentration had been broken. For some reason, those timid knocks bothered him more than the thunder that had just shaken the walls. He stood up and walked through the main hallway, his footsteps muffled by the Persian rug he had acquired on one of his trips to Asia. Upon reaching the top of the staircase leading to the foyer, he saw Wilson opening the door. The wind rushed in, bringing with it the scent of rain and a biting chill, and that was when Henry saw her. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, soaked to the bone. Her hair, which was probably brown when dry, looked almost black, plastered against her pale face. In her small hands, red from the cold, she clutched an old, worn cleaning rag. And beside her, almost hidden behind her legs, a baby wrapped in rags shivered non-stop. "Would you hire me?" The girl's voice was clear despite her bluish lips. "I need a job so I can buy milk for my brother." Wilson looked up, seeking guidance from his employer. Henry descended the stairs slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the tiny creature who dared to disturb his night. "Her job is no game, little girl," he said, using the same tone he reserved for dismissing bad ideas in business meetings. The girl didn't back down. On the contrary, she lifted her chin slightly, displaying a dignity that was disconcerting for someone so small and vulnerable. Then it happened. Their gazes met, and something in the depths of that child's brown eyes pierced the armor Henry had built around himself. A flash of memory invaded his mind. Another pair of eyes, identical to these, closing forever in a hospital bed. Sarah, his younger sister. The resemblance was unsettling. The same determined look, the same silent courage when facing the inevitable. Sarah had been exactly the same age when illness took her, an illness that all his family's fortune couldn't cure. Henry felt his hands tremble slightly. He clenched them into fists, trying to push away the memory he had buried so long ago. "Sir?" Wilson's voice brought him back to the present. Henry realized he was standing in the middle of the stairs, staring at the girl without saying a word. "Mr. Calloway is not hiring at the moment," Wilson began to explain, with the kindness his employer never showed. Henry descended the last few steps. The girl watched him with a mixture of hope and resignation. He noticed then that she was not just wet, she was starving. The hollow cheeks and thin body told a story her pride tried to hide. "What's your name?" Henry surprised himself by asking. "Emily," she answered, "and this is Noah, my brother." The baby coughed, a weak, wet sound that made Emily tighten the rags around him even more. Henry pushed away the thought that invaded him and out of habit, reached into his pocket for some money. That was what he always did, solve problems with money. A few bills, and his conscience would be clear. He could return to his contracts and numbers, but Emily shook her head when she saw what he was about to do. "I don't want charity," she said with surprising firmness. "I want to work." Her words echoed through the foyer, resonating deep in Henry's mind. The refusal of money, something that almost never happened in his life, left him momentarily speechless. "Work? And what do you know how to do?" The question came out gentler than he intended. "I can scrub the floor." Emily raised the old rag she was holding. "I can wash dishes, make beds, I learn anything fast." Henry felt a lump in his throat. He could see Sarah in her. Sarah, who never had the chance to grow up. Sarah, who loved planting flowers in the garden of the mansion they grew up in, who said she would become a doctor one day to cure people like her. Why did this unknown child affect him so much? He had learned to ignore poverty on the streets, to turn away from beggars, to delegate charity to his assistants through anonymous donations. It was easier to handle human misery when it was just statistics, no faces, especially not a face so similar to Sarah's. His rational mind began listing all the reasons he should instruct Wilson to give the girl some money and shut the door. Safety, legal responsibility, inconvenience, his valuable time. After all, what would he do with 2 children? His mansion wasn't a place for kids. He glanced around. His head of security had discreetly appeared in the hallway, alert to the unusual situation. The housekeeper peeked in from the kitchen door. They all expected him to do the obvious, dismiss the girl with some superficial generosity, but something inside him, something that hadn't stirred in a very long time, stopped him. "Come in," he said, surprising everyone, including himself. Emily hesitated as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. "Come on, come in before you both catch pneumonia," Henry insisted, with a bit of impatience masking his own confusion about this decision. Wilson quickly grabbed some towels from a nearby cabinet while Henry ushered the children inside. Emily took careful steps, leaving small puddles on the spotless marble floor. The warmth of the mansion enveloped the 3 of them immediately, a shocking contrast to the biting cold of the storm. Henry watched Emily look around, her eyes widening at the luxury that surrounded her. The crystal chandeliers, the artwork on the walls, the antique and valuable furniture. It all must have looked like something out of a fairy tale to a child who had known nothing but hardship. "Mrs. Parker will look after you," Henry said, beckoning to the housekeeper. "Get them a hot bath and dry clothes and food they need to eat." Mrs. Parker, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression but kind eyes, nodded and held out her hand to Emily. The girl, however, didn't take it right away. "Will you really give me a job?" she asked, clutching her brother tighter. Henry felt everyone's eyes on him. His self-preservation instinct told him to back off, to set clear boundaries, to not get involved. But another part of him, a part he'd thought long dead, pushed him in a different direction. "We'll handle that later," he answered, avoiding a direct promise. "Right now, you both need to get warm and have something to eat." Emily nodded, finally accepting Mrs. Parker's hand. As she was led upstairs, Henry noticed she never let go of the old rag. That worn piece of cloth seemed to be more than just a cleaning tool. It was a symbol of her determination, of her dignity. "Sir, if I may," Wilson began, clearly concerned about the unusual situation. "Not now, Wilson," Henry cut him off, still watching the stairs where the children had disappeared. "Prepare a hot meal, something simple. I doubt empty stomachs can handle anything too fancy." Wilson nodded and left, leaving Henry alone with his thoughts. He walked over to the nearest window and watched the storm still raging outside. Somewhere in that same city lay the place where those children came from. Somewhere so terrible that it made a little girl brave the rain with a baby in her arms, not to seek shelter, but to seek work. An hour later, Henry was back in his office, trying unsuccessfully to return to work. His mind kept drifting to the children. Mrs. Parker had told him they'd already bathed, put on clean clothes they'd found, and eaten a simple soup. The baby, she said, was warm now but seemed weak and possibly ill. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, expecting Wilson with an update. But it was Emily who appeared, wearing pajamas that were clearly too big and likely belonged to someone on the staff. Her hair, now clean, was indeed brown, falling in gentle curls around her shoulders. "May I talk to you?" she asked, with a confidence that contrasted with her vulnerable situation. Henry motioned to the chair in front of his desk. Emily sat down, her feet barely touching the floor. "Thank you for the food and the clothes," she began. "Noah's already asleep. He always gets very tired after eating." "Where did you two come from, Emily?" Henry asked directly. The girl lowered her eyes for a moment, as if picking her words carefully. "Our parents died 6 months ago," she explained. "Car accident. A social worker placed us in a shelter, but it was awful. The older kids hit Noah and stole our food." Henry felt an inexplicable surge of anger at the thought. "So we ran away," Emily continued. "I found an empty basement in an abandoned building. A man who sells newspapers on the corner let me stay there sometimes, especially when it rained a lot. He's the one who told me I might find work in the big houses on the hill." She spoke like a miniature adult, forced into maturity by necessity. Henry realized she probably had to grow up very quickly over the past few weeks. "What about the baby? How did you manage to feed him all this time?" Emily bit her lip. "Sometimes I got a few dollars by sweeping the bakery's sidewalk. Other times," she hesitated, "other times I just took what I needed from dumpsters behind supermarkets." Henry's stomach turned. The image of that child rummaging through garbage to feed her brother was almost too much to bear. "Why didn't you ask for help? There are social services in the city." "They would have separated us," Emily answered promptly. "I heard the social workers talking. Noah is small, babies get adopted more easily. I promised our parents I'd take care of him." The determination in her voice deeply affected Henry. He remembered his own promise to Sarah on her deathbed, that he would live enough for both of them, that he would accomplish great things. A promise that drove him to build his financial empire, but which had dried up his capacity for human connection in the process. "And you think you can work here?" he asked, returning to the original topic. "I can." Emily straightened in her chair. "I'm strong and learn quickly. At my old school, before everything happened, I was the top student." There was a spark of intelligence in her eyes that Henry couldn't deny, the same spark Sarah had. Emily's story touched something deep within him. It wasn't just her physical resemblance to Sarah that disturbed him, but the combination of fragility and strength she displayed. She was small and vulnerable, yet showed unyielding determination to protect her brother. Henry realized he was at a crossroads. He could do what he normally would: provide some impersonal aid, maybe find a decent orphanage for the children, make a generous donation and move on. Or he could do something he hadn't done in decades: let someone into his closed-off world. "You can stay here for now," he finally said, "until we find a suitable solution." Emily's face lit up, but Henry raised his hand to temper her excitement. "That doesn't mean I'm hiring you. You're a child, and you should be in school, not working. But while you're here, I expect you to follow the house rules." Emily nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir." "I promise you won't regret it." When she left, Henry remained seated for a long time, pondering what he had just done. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he felt something unrelated to money or power: empathy, an emotion he thought he had buried along with his sister. Outside, the storm was beginning to die down, but inside Henry, a new storm was just beginning. A storm of long-forgotten emotions, awakened by a little girl who knocked on his door on a rainy night. He didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the start of a profound transformation in his life, a journey that would lead him to rediscover parts of himself he believed lost forever. "The blue room will do," Henry told his butler as they climbed the mansion's grand staircase. "It's spacious and has that spare bed we can use for the baby." Wilson nodded, mentally noting his employer's instructions. "I'll ask Mrs. Parker to get everything ready right away. As for clothes for the children, have someone buy whatever they need in the morning," Henry interrupted. "For tonight, improvise with what we have, and call Dr. Collins to check on the baby as soon as possible. He doesn't look well." The butler hesitated for a moment. "Sir, if I may ask, How long do you plan for the children to stay? Henry paused in the hallway, staring at a painting on the wall, a painting of the countryside home where he spent summers as a child with Sarah. It was a simple question, but one he had no answer to. As long as necessary, he finally said vaguely. A few hours later, Emily sat timidly on the edge of the huge canopy bed in the blue room. Her eyes scanned every detail: the cloud-patterned wallpaper, the reading chair by the window, the soft carpet under her feet, and the small crib the staff had brought in for Noah. Everything seemed too unreal. Mrs. Parker finished placing some clothing into a dresser. These should fit for now. Tomorrow we'll have proper clothes for both of you. Emily touched the soft fabric of the pajamas she was wearing, so different from the rough, worn clothing she was used to. How long are we staying? The housekeeper looked at her kindly but evasively. That depends on Mr. Calloway, but don't worry about that now. Rest. Your little brother is sleeping soundly. Indeed, Noah was in a deep sleep in the makeshift crib, wrapped in clean, soft linens, wearing an expression of peace Emily hadn't seen in months. When the door closed, leaving her alone with her sleeping brother, Emily couldn't lie down right away. She walked to the window and watched the rain, now weaker. Out there was the hostile world she knew. Constant fear, hunger, helplessness. In here, what was this? A temporary shelter? A trap? The luxury around her scared her almost as much as it attracted her. She felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't hers, and she knew from experience that good things rarely lasted. Don't get used to it, she whispered to herself, a habit she'd adopted in recent months of loneliness. By tomorrow, it could all be over. The next morning, Henry had his usual coffee in his office when Wilson brought him the news. Dr. Collins examined the boy. He has a mild respiratory infection, but nothing serious. He prescribed antibiotics and recommended more nutritious meals. As for the girl, she refused to leave the room until she was sure her brother was okay. Henry nodded, absorbing the information without showing emotion. She asked if she can start working already, Wilson went on, with a slight tone of amusement in his voice. He insisted that she wants to pay for your hospitality. Henry raised his eyes from his digital newspaper. Work? She barely reaches the kitchen table. Even so, she seems very determined. Mrs. Parker found her trying to make her own bed this morning. She did a surprisingly good job for someone her age. Henry turned back to his documents, signaling that the conversation was over. But when Wilson left, he found himself unable to focus. The image of little Emily meticulously making a bed 3 times her size lingered in his mind. Over the next 3 days, Henry deliberately avoided the children. He focused on his meetings, used his office as an inviolable sanctuary, and dined out for social commitments he normally would have declined. It was easier this way, he told himself, creating distance, not allowing those children to upset the neat order of his life. But that didn't mean he stopped observing them. Through the mansion's security cameras, which he discreetly checked on his tablet, he watched Emily in the garden, running around like a child for the first time. He saw her discover the ornamental fountain, spending an entire afternoon enthralled by the colorful fish. He noticed how she, even in moments of fun, never let her brother out of sight. From Wilson's and Mrs. Parker's reports, he learned that Noah was improving, gaining color in his cheeks and more energy. He also learned that Emily had discovered the house's library and was amazed by the number of books. She said her old school's library only had that many books in the movies, Wilson shared. On the afternoon of the 4th day, however, Henry's self-imposed exile was interrupted by the sound of a child's laughter echoing through the mansion. A genuine, crystalline laugh that seemed at odds with the austere environment. Driven by curiosity, Henry followed the sound to the sunroom, a rarely used glass-enclosed sitting area. Through the slightly open door, he saw Emily on the floor playing with Noah. She had built a kind of fort with cushions, and the baby, now more alert and rosy-cheeked, clapped and babbled happily. "And here comes the dragon," Emily said dramatically, moving a plush dinosaur someone must have bought them. "But the brave knight will save the princess." Henry watched, unnoticed, as she created a fantasy world for her brother, using the expensive cushions and available decorative items as props. There was a simplicity in that play that contrasted with the sophistication of the room. Wilson appeared silently at his side. "She's had that energy since she woke up," he remarked in a low voice. "It's the first time I've really seen her act like a child since she arrived." Henry didn't reply immediately. Something about that scene both bothered and attracted him. Emily's laughter, so similar to Sarah's, brought back memories he had suppressed for decades. He recalled the make-believe games he used to play with his sister, the imaginary worlds they created before the illness stole everything. "They need proper toys," he finally said, stepping away from the door, "and clothes that actually fit them, and children's books. Take care of it." Wilson nodded, hiding a small smile. "I already took the liberty of ordering a few basic items, sir. They'll arrive today." Henry returned to his office, trying to refocus on work, but the image of those children playing stayed in his mind like a bright painting on a wall of dull tones. His mansion, always so silent and organized, now had new sounds: laughter, the occasional crying, the pitter-patter of tiny feet running through the hallways. At first, those sounds irritated him, disturbing the austere peace he had cultivated for years, but gradually, he began to find himself anticipating them, listening closely when silence returned. As if, in some way, those sounds were humanizing the luxurious mausoleum his home had become. A week went by. On a particularly sunny afternoon, Henry decided to work on the terrace, something he rarely did. He was reviewing quarterly financial reports when he noticed Emily in the garden, at a distance. She was holding Noah's hand, helping him take small, hesitant steps on the grass. 1, 2, 3, she counted. "You can do it, Noah." The baby laughed, stumbling but always supported by his sister. It was the simplest scene in the world, so common between siblings, yet deeply moving in this context. The gardener, who had been working in a nearby flower bed, approached them and said something Henry couldn't hear. Emily responded, and soon all three were kneeling, examining something on the ground. The gardener then handed a small trowel to Emily and showed her how to dig a hole. Next, he took a small pouch from his pocket and poured what looked like seeds into the girl's hand. Henry watched, intrigued by the ease with which Emily seemed to win everyone over. The gardener, a serious man who had worked for Henry for years and rarely exchanged words with him, was now smiling broadly, teaching the girl how to plant flowers. That scene stirred a pang of something Henry couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't exactly envy, but perhaps a reminder of how he'd isolated himself in his world of business and numbers, losing the ability to form simple, genuine connections. That night, against his usual routine, Henry decided to have dinner at home. The dining room table, designed to seat 20 for formal events, seemed absurdly large for just one solitary man. Normally, it didn't bother him, but tonight, it felt more obvious. "Wilson," he called, "have the children already eaten?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Parker serves them earlier, as you instructed." Henry looked at his plate for a moment. "Starting tomorrow, they can have dinner with me." Wilson couldn't hide his surprise. "As you wish, sir." The next day, when Emily and Noah were told they would dine with the owner of the house, they had mixed reactions. Noah, still too little to grasp the implications, simply pounded on the high chair they had prepared for him. Emily, on the other hand, seemed visibly anxious. "What if I spill something? There are so many different utensils," she confessed to Mrs. Parker as the woman fixed her hair. "Don't worry about that, dear. Just be yourself." The dining room, with its imposing chandelier and antique furniture, intimidated Emily. When Henry entered, she straightened her posture, trying to appear older than she was, the way she always did when she wanted to be taken seriously. "Good evening," said Henry, sitting at the head of the table. "I hope you're comfortable." Emily nodded, unsure how to behave. The silence that followed was broken only by the clinking of utensils and Noah's occasional babbling. "I saw you in the garden today," Henry finally ventured, trying to start a conversation. "What were you planting with Mikhail?" Emily's eyes lit up at the question. "Daisies. Mr. Mikhail said they grow fast and stay strong, even in bad weather." "Like you," Henry commented without thinking, surprising himself with the remark. Emily smiled shyly. "He let me choose the spot to plant them. I put them near the fountain, where we can see them from our window." Our window, Henry thought. She already considered that space hers, her home. That should have bothered him. After all, this was supposed to be temporary, right? But strangely, it didn't. "Do you like flowers?" he asked, remembering how Sarah had loved the garden. Emily nodded enthusiastically. "My mom had a small garden in our old apartment, just a few pots on the balcony, but she took care of them every day." It was the first time Emily mentioned her parents. Henry realized that even though he knew they were orphans, he'd never truly considered what that meant for them, especially Emily, who was old enough to be fully aware of the loss. "Your mother must have been a good gardener," Emily smiled at the memory. "She used to say that plants are like people. They need care, patience, and a safe place to grow." Henry felt a pang in his chest. The simple wisdom of that phrase, coming from a child who had lost everything, moved him deeply. The rest of the dinner flowed more easily. Emily asked about the paintings on the walls, about the places Henry had visited, about the books in the library. Her questions, though childish, were insightful, showing a genuine curiosity Henry rarely found in adults. In the days that followed, dining together became a habit. Henry began to look forward to those moments, mentally preparing topics to discuss with Emily, thinking of stories he could share that might interest her. He was surprised by how easily they conversed, despite the vast difference in age and life experience. One afternoon, while working in his office, Henry heard a soft knock at the door. It wasn't the confident knock of Wilson or Mrs. Parker. "Come in," he said, curious. Emily opened the door cautiously, as if testing whether she was really welcome. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Calloway." "What is it, Emily?" he asked, setting aside the documents he'd been reviewing. She hesitated, holding something behind her back. "I made something for you. To thank you for everything." She handed him a drawing on colored paper. It was a simple depiction of the mansion, with stick figures representing Henry, Emily, Noah, Wilson, and Mrs. Parker, all holding hands in front of the house. At the top, in carefully drawn but slightly uneven letters, it read, "Our family." Henry took the drawing gently, as if it were a valuable document. A whirlwind of emotions hit him: surprise, discomfort, a warm feeling in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Family, he thought. It was a word he had lost the meaning of since the deaths of his parents and Sarah. A word he avoided, along with all the emotional commitments it implied. "It's very nice, Emily," he finally managed to say. "Thank you." The smile she gave him in return was so radiant, it seemed to brighten the entire austere office. "Can I help you with anything?" she asked, eyeing the stack of papers on his desk. "I'm good at organizing. At school, the teacher always asked me to rearrange the classroom library." The offer was so genuine that Henry couldn't bring himself to refuse it completely. "Actually," he said, improvising, "you could help me organize these catalogs by color. Can you do that?" Emily nodded seriously, as though she had just received a very important mission. Henry separated some harmless art and antique furniture catalogs, nothing confidential, and showed her how he wanted them arranged. It was a simple, almost unnecessary task, but the enthusiasm with which Emily approached it made Henry feel strangely content. As she worked in the corner of the office, sorting the catalogs into color-coded piles, Henry watched her covertly. She was so determined, so serious in each movement. It was almost comical for someone so small, yet it was also deeply moving. She clearly wanted to prove her worth, to show she deserved to stay. What Emily didn't realize was that she had already done more than enough. She had brought something back to the Calloway mansion that had been missing for decades: life. Over the following weeks, small but significant changes took place in the mansion's routine. Henry's office, once forbidden territory for everyone but Wilson, now received regular visits from Emily, who brought drawings, small discoveries from the garden, or simply came to chat. Noah, now recovered and growing more active by the day, explored the house with the insatiable curiosity of a healthy toddler, coaxing smiles even from the most serious staff members. The house, once resembling a pristine but lifeless museum, now occasionally had toys scattered about, colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the constant sound of little footsteps and childish laughter. Henry still struggled internally with the attachment growing within him. He told himself he was merely fulfilling a moral obligation, that he would soon find a suitable place for the children, that his life would return to normal. But each time Emily called him to see a newly bloomed flower in the garden, or whenever Noah took a step on his own and everyone celebrated as if it were a great achievement, something inside him changed. One morning, Henry was awakened earlier than usual by a commotion in the house. He left his room to investigate and found staff members rushing around and Mrs. Parker looking alarmed. "What happened?" he asked, alarmed himself. "It's Noah," the housekeeper explained. "He disappeared from the bedroom. Emily is frantic, looking everywhere." Henry felt his heart clench. "Get everyone searching. Check every corner of the house and the grounds, now." He personally joined the search, checking all the places a baby might hide or, worse, get hurt. The mansion, with its numerous rooms, stairs, and hidden nooks, suddenly seemed like a dangerous labyrinth for a small child. It was Wilson who finally found Noah, sleeping peacefully under Henry's desk, hugging a teddy bear. When Henry arrived, he saw Emily kneeling beside her brother, tears of relief streaming down her face. "He's okay," she whispered. "I don't know how he got out of his crib. I was supposed to be watching him." She looked so small and vulnerable then, carrying a responsibility far too heavy for her young shoulders, that Henry felt something break inside him. Without thinking, he knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It wasn't your fault," he said softly. "Kids do things like this. You can't watch him every second." Emily looked at him, surprised by the physical contact and by the kindness in his voice. "But I promised to take care of him." "And you are taking care of him," Henry assured her. "Better than many adults would. But you don't have to do it alone anymore." Those words, spoken almost unintentionally, marked a profound shift in their relationship. It was the first time Henry admitted, however indirectly, that he was willing to share responsibility for the children, that they were no longer alone in the world. For Emily, it was as though a huge weight had been lifted from her small shoulders. For Henry, it was an irreversible step towards something he'd avoided for years: emotional commitment. That evening, Henry sat alone in his office, staring at Emily's drawing, now framed on his desk. "Our family," read the childlike title. Family, a word he had buried with Sarah. A word that meant vulnerability, the possibility of loss and pain. But now that word was beginning to mean something else. A new beginning, a chance to mend something that had been broken long ago, not just in the children's lives, but in his own life as well. Henry stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Emily's daisies had begun to sprout. As she had said, quoting her mother, plants, like people, need care, patience, and a safe place to grow. Maybe, he thought, that applied not only to Emily and Noah, but also to himself. Maybe he, too, needed to rediscover how to grow again, to open space in his life for something beyond business and wealth accumulation. The change had begun, subtle yet undeniable. And no matter how he tried to resist, Henry knew deep down that his life would never be the same. Dark clouds hid the moon. The hospital seemed larger and more ominous than Henry remembered, with endless corridors that seemed to shift direction as he ran. His heart pounded, driven by desperation to arrive in time. Room 307 kept getting farther away with every step. "Sarah!" he shouted, but his voice sounded muffled, as if underwater. "Sarah, I'm coming." When he finally reached the door to the room, his hands trembled so much he could barely turn the knob. Inside, he found the bed empty, the white sheets neatly tucked, as if no one had ever lain there. "You came too late," said the nurse by his side, suddenly. "She waited for you." Henry turned to face her, but she was no longer a nurse, she was Emily, with accusatory eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You promised you'd be here," she said, in Sarah's voice. Henry woke up with a jolt, heart racing and gasping for air. He sat on the bed and ran his hands over his face, feeling the cold sweat on his forehead. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. It wasn't the first time he'd dreamed of Sarah. For years after her death, the nightmares were frequent, always variations of the same theme. Him failing to arrive in time, failing to save her, failing to uphold the promise he'd made to their parents to watch over her while they traveled. But with time, the dreams had lessened, just as the memories had been buried under layers of work and emotional isolation. Until now. Until Emily. Henry got up and walked to the window. The night was calm, the sky clear and filled with stars. No sign of the storm clouds from the nightmare. The moon illuminated the garden, where Emily's daisies were starting to bloom. He tried to go back to sleep, but the dream disturbed him too deeply. After half an hour of tossing and turning, he rose and put on his robe. He needed to check something, or maybe he just needed to convince himself that this nightmare, unlike the one from so many years ago, had not become reality. The corridor was quiet as he made his way to the blue room where Emily and Noah slept. At night, the mansion always felt tranquil, almost anesthetized by its silence. But now, there was something different in the air, a barely perceptible sense of sleeping life rather than emptiness. The door to the children's room was ajar, as Emily always left it, afraid Noah might need something during the night and no one would hear. Henry approached silently and peeked inside. A nightlight shaped like a star cast a gentle glow across the room. On the bed, Emily slept on her side, one arm protectively around Noah, who had climbed out of his crib and snuggled against her, something he did almost every night now. Her brown hair fanned out on the pillow, and her face, normally so serious and focused during the day, looked completely relaxed in sleep. Standing at the door, Henry realized how much Emily resembled Sarah now that her defenses were down in slumber. It wasn't just the physical resemblance, it was something deeper, an intangible quality they both shared, an inner strength, a quiet courage, a capacity for caring so deeply about others. Something inside him softened at the sight of that peaceful scene. The anguish from the nightmare began to dissipate, replaced by a lighter, almost forgotten sensation. Emily shifted slightly, murmuring something incomprehensible, and pulled the blanket closer around Noah. Even asleep, she was watching over him. Henry stepped away from the door, not wanting to disturb that moment of peace. But instead of returning to his room, his steps led him to the mansion's attic, a place he had avoided for years. The attic was clean and organized, like every part of the house, but had an air of abandonment that went beyond mere dust. It was where he stored memories he couldn't face, but had never had the courage to throw away. In a corner, beneath a beige cloth, lay the chest he sought. Henry hesitated for a moment before pulling off the covering, revealing an old cedar trunk with the initials S.C. engraved on the lid. Sarah Calloway. With slightly trembling hands, he opened the trunk he hadn't touched in more than 2 decades. The smell of cedar and a faint hint of lavender, his mother's favorite scent to store among clothes, filled the air. On top, neatly folded, lay the last dress Sarah wore before she became bedridden, light blue, with small daisies embroidered on the collar, like a foreshadowing of the flowers now growing in the garden, planted by another little girl. Henry moved the dress aside and continued exploring the trunk. There were storybooks worn from frequent use, school notebooks with Sarah's neat handwriting, and drawings, lots of drawings. She had loved to draw, even on her bad days when the illness weakened her. In a faded cardboard folder, he found photographs. Sarah in the summer garden, wearing a hat too big for her small head. Sarah and him building a sandcastle at the beach. Sarah blowing out the candles on her last birthday, too thin but beaming with a bright smile. Then a photo he had completely forgotten. Him and Sarah sitting on a garden bench, he reading a book to her. He couldn't recall who took that photo, perhaps the housekeeper at the time, but he remembered that day, that moment. It was The Secret Garden, Sarah's favorite book. He read it to her every night during her illness, sometimes the same chapters repeated over and over because she loved it so much. Something wet fell onto the photograph. Henry touched his face and realized he was crying. When was the last time he had cried? He couldn't remember. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the pain of loss, not merely as a painful memory to be avoided, but as part of who he was, of who Sarah had helped shape him to be. And along with the pain came other memories. The sound of her laughter, the way she wrinkled her nose when concentrating on a tough drawing, how she always had a kind word even on her worst days. Henry didn't know how long he stayed there, sitting on the attic floor surrounded by Sarah's memories. When he finally put everything back in the trunk, dawn was breaking outside. But instead of covering it up again, he decided to take one item with him, the worn copy of The Secret Garden. That morning's breakfast followed the routine of the last few weeks. Henry, Emily, and Noah at the table together, with Emily helping her brother eat while excitedly talking about the day's plans. "Mr. Mikhail said I can help trim the shrubs today," she said, cutting the baby's pancake into small pieces. "He's going to show me how to use those special shears, but only on the thinner branches." Henry nodded, watching her with new eyes after the night spent in reflection. "Emily," he said, interrupting her flow of words, "do you like to read?" Emily looked at him, surprised by the unexpected question. "I love it. At my old school, I used to borrow more books from the library than anyone else." She hesitated, as though unsure if she should add more. "Since I came here, I've been looking at the books in your library, but they're a bit difficult." "That's understandable. Most are technical or literary classics," Henry agreed. Then he placed the book he had taken from the attic onto the table. "I thought you might like this." Emily looked curiously at the worn copy of The Secret Garden. "Is it yours?" "It belonged to my sister," Henry said, feeling a strange mix of emotions as he shared this. "She was about your age when she read it." Emily's eyes grew wide. "You have a sister, you never mentioned her." "I had," he corrected softly. "She passed away when she was still a child, a long time ago." Emily picked up the book carefully, as though it were precious and fragile. "I'm sorry," she said with the sincerity only children can express. "What was her name?" "Sarah." "That's a pretty name," Emily commented, flipping through the yellowed pages. She stopped at one page where a pressed, dried flower lay. "She kept flowers in her books too. I used to do that with the flowers my mum gave me." Henry smiled faintly, recalling Sarah's habit. "Yes, she loved doing that. She said it made the flowers last forever, like the stories." For the first time, talking about Sarah didn't bring only pain. There was something comforting in sharing these memories with Emily, in seeing the book his sister had loved so much in the hands of another child who might appreciate it. After breakfast, as Emily headed out to the garden with Noah and her new book, Henry went to his office feeling a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The workday was surprisingly productive, as though the burden of repressed memories had been partially lifted, freeing energy that used to be spent on not remembering. Late in the afternoon, he found Emily in the library, so absorbed in her reading that she didn't notice him until he took a seat in the armchair beside her. "Do you like it?" he asked. Emily looked up, her face alight with enthusiasm. "It's wonderful. Mary is kind of grumpy at first, but I understand why. And the secret garden, it must be magical to find a place like that." "Sarah used to say we all have a secret garden inside us," Henry commented. "Her special place where we keep our most important things, sometimes locked away for too long." Emily pondered that with the seriousness she often displayed, like how your heart was locked up after she died. The directness of her question caught Henry off guard. That was exactly it. His heart had become a locked garden after Sarah's death, and he'd thrown away the key, convinced it was safer. "Something like that," he admitted. "How did you know?" Emily shrugged with the simplicity of a child's logic. "You seemed sad when we first came. Not sad like crying, but sad inside. My mum was like that after my dad died until she passed away too." They shared a moment of silence, acknowledging two different but parallel losses that built a bridge of understanding between them. "I think Sarah would have liked you," Henry finally said. Emily's face lit up as though that was the greatest compliment she could receive. In the days that followed, Henry started integrating Emily into his routine more actively. During breakfast, he would simplify and explain some of the projects he was working on. Emily listened attentively, asking surprisingly insightful questions for her age. "Why are you buying that factory if it's not profitable?" she asked once, after Henry mentioned a recent acquisition. "Because sometimes the value of something isn't in what it is now, but in what it can become," he explained. That factory has good workers and equipment, just poorly managed. With the right changes, it can become very productive. Emily nodded, absorbing the information. Like me and Noah. When you found us, we weren't profitable. She pronounced the word carefully, clearly repeating a term she had heard. But you saw we could get better with help. The analogy caught him off guard. It's not exactly like that, Emily. People aren't businesses. But isn't the principle the same? She persisted. Investing in something or someone because you believe in their potential even when others don't see it. Henry looked at her with newfound respect. You're right. In a way, it's a similar principle. In the afternoons, after the homeschooling he had arranged for Emily, they often ended up in the library together. He showed her maps of places he had visited, explained basic business concepts using simple examples, and sometimes just listened while she read aloud, her pronunciation improving every day. How do you decide what's the right thing to do? She asked once, after he shared a business dilemma he was facing. Henry thought about it. Usually, I try to analyze all possibilities and choose the one that yields the best long-term outcome. But how do you know which one is best? Well, in business, it's usually the one that brings the most profit to the company. Emily frowned, not entirely satisfied with the answer. What if the choice that brings the most money hurts other people? Her question, in its childlike simplicity, touched a sore spot. How many times, over the years, had he made decisions based purely on numbers, ignoring the human impact? Hostile takeovers, factory closures in small towns where they were the main employer, job cuts to boost quarterly profits. That's an excellent question, Emily, he finally said. The truth is, I haven't always made the best choices in that regard. But a truly good decision should consider not just profit, but also the people affected by it. Emily smiled, satisfied with his honesty. My mom used to say that before making a decision, we should ask if we'd be proud to share it with someone we love. Henry felt a pang in his chest. How many of his past decisions would pass that test? How many would he be proud to share with Sarah, if she was still alive? That was when he realized something extraordinary. Emily wasn't just learning from him, he was learning from her. Her simple but profound questions made him question the values and practices he had taken for granted for decades. At night, when he tucked her in, a new ritual that had recently begun and that they both seemed to enjoy, Emily often shared her thoughts and worries of the day, trusting him in a way no one had for a very long time. Do you think my daisies will survive the winter? She asked one night, after watching the weather forecast predict a cold snap. Daisies are quite hardy flowers, he assured her, but if necessary we can build a little shelter to protect them. Emily looked relieved by the answer. As he rose to leave, she took his hand. Thank you for letting us stay, she said with a sincerity that tightened his heart. I prayed every night for a safe place for Noah, and then we found you. Henry felt a lump in his throat. I think maybe I needed to find you too, he admitted, almost in a whisper. Later, in his office, Henry found himself looking at Sarah's portrait, which he had placed on his desk, a photo he'd retrieved from the trunk in the attic. Next to it was Emily's drawing, with its stick figures under the heading Our Family. For the first time, he allowed himself to think about the future, not just in terms of business and acquisitions, but in terms of people, Emily and Noah. The plans he could make for them, the security he could provide, the family they could become. The thought still scared him. Opening himself up to love meant also opening himself to loss and pain. It meant being vulnerable again. But as he looked at the two images side by side, past and present, the sister he lost and the children fate had brought to his door, Henry began to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was worth taking that risk. Autumn arrived, painting the Calloway Mansion's garden in shades of red and gold. Emily's daisies had completed their cycle, but in their place, Henry helped her plant tulip bulbs, which would bloom in spring. It's an act of faith, he explained, as they pushed the bulbs into the damp soil. We plant them now, without seeing any immediate result, trusting something beautiful will grow months later. Emily absorbed that lesson with the same seriousness she gave everything Henry taught her. Like when you invest money in a company that doesn't make a profit yet. Henry smiled. In just a few months, she had grasped more about business than many interns who'd passed through his company. Exactly like that. Life in the mansion had settled into an astonishingly natural routine. Mornings began with a family breakfast, followed by lessons from the tutor Henry had hired for Emily. Afternoons were often devoted to joint activities, time in the garden, reading in the library, or even mini business meetings in which Henry explained some simple project he was working on. Noah, now almost 2, was talking more and loved following Henry around the house, imitating his gestures with such comedic precision that he elicited smiles from even the most stoic staff members. It was a simple joy Henry never imagined experiencing again, something impossible to measure in dollars or stocks, but which somehow filled a void he hadn't even known was there. On a Thursday morning, however, that peace was disrupted by an unexpected visitor. "Richard Matthews is here to see you, sir," Wilson announced, stepping into the office where Henry was reviewing contracts. Henry raised his eyebrows in surprise. Richard, his former business partner and occasional consultant, rarely appeared without an appointment. "Send him in." Richard Matthews entered with the confidence of a man well acquainted with the setting. Tall, with impeccably trimmed grey hair and a suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, he was the perfect representative of Henry's old corporate world. "Henry, my old friend," he greeted, extending his hand. "Sorry to drop by like this, but I was in the area and thought I'd personally discuss that Westfield Industries proposal." "Of course, Richard. Have a seat." Henry indicated the armchair across from his desk. "Coffee. Scotch would be better, if it's not too early for you," Richard said with a knowing grin. Henry was about to ask Wilson to bring their drinks when the sound of rapid footsteps and childish laughter came from the hallway. Before he could react, the office door swung fully open and Emily burst in, clutching a drawing. "Henry, look what I did in class." She stopped abruptly when she saw the visitor, her excited expression replaced by shyness. "Sorry, I didn't know you had company." Richard looked at the girl with evident surprise, then at Henry, raising an eyebrow in silent questioning. "It's fine, Emily," Henry reassured her. "This is Mr. Matthews, a business associate. Richard, this is Emily." Emily, recovering her composure, extended her hand as she'd learned to do. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Matthews." Richard shook her hand politely, though his eyes still showed confusion. "Pleasure is mine, Emily. Are you a visiting relative?" Before Henry could answer, Noah appeared in the doorway, followed by Mrs. Parker, who seemed somewhat out of breath from trying to catch up with the children. "Apologies, Mr. Calloway," the housekeeper said hastily. "They slipped away during the tutor's break." "It's all right, Mrs. Parker," Henry replied, noting Richard's increasingly puzzled look. "Emily, why don't you and Noah show Mrs. Parker your new drawing while I talk with Mr. Matthews? Then you can show me later." Emily nodded, looking a bit disappointed but understanding. "Come on, Noah. We need to let Henry work." She took her brother's hand and left the office, not without a final, curious glance at the visitor. When the door closed, Richard let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Henry, since when does anyone call you by your first name, and who are these kids?" "Don't tell me you finally got married without my knowledge." Henry poured 2 glasses of scotch from a bottle he kept in the office cupboard. "It's a long story, Richard." "I'm all ears," his friend replied, settling back in the chair. "I confess I'm completely intrigued. The Henry Calloway I know barely tolerates adults, let alone children." Henry sat, wondering where to begin. Richard was one of the few who knew about Sarah, having met Henry shortly after the tragedy when they were both starting their careers. "They're orphans," he finally said. "They showed up at my door during that big storm a few months ago. The girl was looking for work so she could feed her brother." Richard nodded slowly, processing the information. "And you took them in? Temporarily, I assume." "That was the initial plan," Henry admitted. "But things developed in unexpected ways." "What kind of development are we talking about, Henry?" Richard's tone was now cautiously professional, the same he used when discussing risky new investments. Henry took a deep breath, realizing it was the first time he would voice what he'd been considering for weeks. "I'm thinking of getting legal custody of them." Richard nearly choked on his drink. "You what?" he coughed. "Have you lost your mind?" I know it seems strange, Henry began. Strange. Richard set his glass down, harder than necessary. It's utterly insane, Henry. You're not exactly father material, no offense, but your life is your company. Always has been. Things change, Richard. Yes, they do. People like us buy new homes, invest in emerging tech, maybe even get married again. We don't adopt random children who appear at our door. Henry felt a stab of irritation. They're not random children to me. Richard leaned forward, his tone now softer, almost condescending. Henry, I understand you might be going through some sort of crisis, or maybe the girl reminds you of Sarah, but you can't make a decision of this magnitude based on momentary emotions. Mentioning Sarah hit a raw nerve. Richard was right, at least partly. Emily did remind Henry of Sarah, not just physically, but in spirit. But was that all? Was his connection to these kids merely a desperate attempt to relive a lost past? It's not just that, he protested. Though his voice lacked the usual conviction, Richard seized on the hesitation to drive his point home. Henry, why are you involving yourself in this? They're not your responsibility. There are systems in place to take care of orphans, systems that work well, especially when funded by someone like you. Have you seen how some of these places are, Richard? Not all of them are bad. There are excellent institutions, especially the private ones. Richard paused and studying his friend. If you're truly concerned about their welfare, you could easily fund their stay in one of the best private homes in the country. Hell, you could fund an entire orphanage if you wanted to. Henry remained silent, considering his friend's words. Richard had always been the voice of reason in business, the one who kept him from making impulsive decisions that could cost millions. Perhaps he was right now too. And don't think this won't affect your business, Richard continued. You really believe your shareholders will stay calm, knowing the man who manages their investments has suddenly decided to become the father of 2 kids. They'll question your judgment, your stability, especially once they learn how impulsive this decision was. It wasn't impulsive, Henry objected, though doubt was growing inside him. They've been here for months. Months? Richard let out a humorless laugh. Henry, you spent more time analyzing the purchase of that property in Chicago than you have on this life-altering decision. He paused, his tone softening. Look, I'm not saying to throw them out on the street. I'm only suggesting you find a more suitable solution for everyone involved. After Richard left, Henry stayed in his office for hours, lost in thought. His friend's words echoed in his mind, feeding doubts that had already existed on some level, but that Henry had managed to ignore until now. What if Richard was right? What if Henry really wasn't capable of being what Emily and Noah needed? His life had revolved around business for so long. He worked long hours, traveled often, faced constant pressure. What kind of environment was that for raising children? Maybe a high-quality private orphanage, with trained professionals, truly was the best option. The kids would have stability, proper education, and he could visit them often, ensure their financial security, even pay for elite colleges when the time came. Determined to at least explore that possibility, Henry asked Wilson to research the best private homes in the region. 2 days later, he had a detailed report about St. Clara Institute, a highly reputable institution about an hour away. They have excellent facilities, Wilson said, showing photographs on his tablet. Individual rooms for older children, regular psychological support, an on-site school, and a range of extracurricular activities. Henry nodded, examining images of well-lit classrooms, neat and orderly bedrooms, well-equipped play areas. It was undoubtedly a first-rate place. Many children less fortunate than Emily and Noah would never dream of having access to somewhere like that. Schedule a visit for tomorrow, he decided. Don't mention anything to the children yet. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about how he would break the news to Emily. How would he explain that? Despite everything they had shared these last few months, he couldn't be what she hoped for. That another institution, no matter how well equipped, would become her home. The visit to St. Clara Institute was just as impressive as the photographs suggested. The director, a middle-aged woman with kind yet professional manners, showed him every facility, explaining the educational programs, the children's routines, and the policies on visits and adoption. "We rarely have vacancies," she explained, "but for someone with your influence, Mr. Calloway, we can certainly make an exception, especially considering your generous donation." Henry nodded, trying to ignore how uncomfortable it felt. The substantial donation he'd pledged was just a fraction of what he would spend raising the children, yet it seemed wrong, like he was buying Emily and Noah's safety. "Would the children stay together?" he asked, recalling Emily's constant fear of being separated from her brother. "We usually separate them by age group, but we can make an exception given the circumstances." The girl could see her brother daily. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing, and Henry made the initial arrangements, signing preliminary papers guaranteeing spots if he confirmed his decision within a week. During the drive back, while his driver navigated the tree-lined road, Henry stared out the window without truly seeing the scenery. He told himself he was doing the right thing. The children would have stability, professional care, and opportunities. It was the rational decision. But since when were decisions about family purely rational? At the mansion, he found Emily in the library, reading to Noah as she often did in the afternoons. He stood at the door, watching unseen. The patience with which she explained the pictures to her brother, the way her eyes sparkled sharing stories she herself had only recently discovered, the trust and security Noah displayed by her side. "Henry!" she exclaimed, noticing him at last, her face lighting up as it always did when she saw him. "We were reading about dinosaurs. Noah loves the T-Rex, but I think velociraptors are more interesting." Henry sat next to them, feeling a knot form in his throat. "Emily, we need to talk." Something in his tone must have warned her, because her smile vanished immediately. "What happened?" Henry hesitated, then decided to be direct. "I found a place for you and Noah. A really nice place, with other children, great teachers, lots of books, and room to play." Emily sat very still, her eyes fixed on Henry, as though trying to process what he had just said. "An orphanage? It's more like a residential school," he corrected, though he knew the distinction meant little. "You'd both have every comfort, the best education." "But we wouldn't stay here," she interrupted, her voice small and controlled, as though afraid that showing emotion would make things worse. "We wouldn't stay with you." "I'd visit often," Henry promised, "and I'd make sure you had everything you needed." Emily lowered her head, her tiny body seeming to shrink before Henry's eyes. Noah, sensing the change in mood, nestled closer to his sister. "Did we do something wrong?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit Henry like a physical blow. "No, of course not. You've both been wonderful. Then why do you want to get rid of us?" "That's not it, Emily. I'm trying to do what's best for you." She lifted her gaze, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I thought staying here was best for us." Henry searched for words that would make sense, words that would convey his fears and doubts. "Emily, my life is complicated. I work a lot, I travel, I have responsibilities. I'm not sure I can give you the attention you deserve." "But you already do," she answered simply. "More than anyone else has since our parents died. There are other factors. Is it because of that man who came here? Did he say something about us?" Henry hesitated, surprised by Emily's perceptiveness. "Richard expressed some concerns. Yes, but the decision is mine." Emily nodded slowly, as if finally understanding. "I always knew we'd have to leave one day," she said, showing a painful maturity for someone so young. "I just thought maybe you liked us enough to let us stay." She stood, taking Noah's hand. "I'll go pack our things." "Don't worry, we don't have much." The silent dignity with which Emily accepted the news was more devastating than any outburst could have been. As she walked away with her head held high, tears finally rolling down her cheeks, Henry saw something that cut him to the core. The same look Sarah had when the doctors said there was no more hope. The look of someone who had learned too early that life can be cruel, that dreams can be shattered, that people you love can disappear. And in that moment, like a bolt of lightning, Henry knew he couldn't do it. He couldn't be just one more person who abandoned Emily and Noah, one more disappointment in their already loss-filled lives. "Emily, wait!" he called, rising abruptly. She stopped, turning slowly as though dreading what he would say next. "I've changed my mind," Henry said, walking toward her and kneeling so he was at eye level. You're not going anywhere. This is your home now, if you want it to be. Emily's face changed slowly, hope battling distrust. Really? You're not sending us away? Really, he confirmed, feeling a certainty he hadn't felt in a long time. Richard is wrong. You are my responsibility now, because I choose for you to be. And you can call me Henry or Uncles or whatever you like, but this is your place. Emily let out a soft sob and, without warning, threw herself into Henry's arms, hugging him with all the strength her little arms could muster. Noah, not wanting to be left out, joined the embrace, his tiny hands clinging to Henry's shirt. In that moment, feeling the warmth of those two children fate had brought to his doorstep, Henry knew he had made the right decision. Not the easiest, not the most rational by corporate standards, but the only one his heart could accept. Richard and the others would have to adapt to this new reality. Because for the first time in decades, Henry Calloway was making a choice not based on what was convenient or profitable, but on what truly mattered. The family court hearing room was smaller and more welcoming than Henry had imagined. It lacked the intimidating solemnity of the courtrooms depicted in films, with dark wood paneling and a severe atmosphere. Instead, the walls were a soft shade of blue, adorned with calm landscape prints and a few potted plants in the corners. Henry adjusted his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. Next to him, Emily nervously fiddled with the hem of the new dress they'd bought just for the occasion. Noah, on Mrs. Parker's lap a few seats back, was oblivious to the gravity of the moment, playing with a small toy car. "Everything will be fine," Henry whispered to Emily, trying to reassure both her and himself. She nodded, her eyes locked on the door through which the judge would enter. "What if she says no?" "She won't," Henry replied with a confidence he didn't fully feel. His lawyer had assured him that everything was in order, that all the reports were favorable, and that his financial standing was a strong argument in his favor. Yet Henry still couldn't shake the anxiety. When Judge Coleman finally entered, everyone stood. She was a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile that seemed genuinely warm, not just a formality. After the initial procedures, she looked directly at Henry. "Mr. Calloway, I've read all the reports, and I must say I'm impressed with the children's progress under your care. The social worker has especially noted the nurturing environment you've provided and the evident bond between the three of you." Henry felt a slight wave of relief, though he knew the final verdict was still to come. "However," the judge continued, "I do have a few questions for you directly, and if you don't mind." "Of course, Your Honor." "Mr. Calloway, you have a demanding career, with long working hours and frequent travel. How do you plan to reconcile that with parental responsibilities?" Henry had rehearsed that answer with his lawyer, but in the moment, he chose honesty over prepared statements. "I've already made significant changes, Your Honor. I've reduced my business trips to the bare essentials, delegated responsibilities I used to insist on keeping for myself, and reorganized my schedule so I can be present at key moments. To be frank, these children have changed my life more than I ever imagined, and every adjustment I've made has only given me more clarity about what truly matters." The judge nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer. Then, to everyone's surprise, she addressed Emily directly. "Emily, do you feel safe and happy in Mr. Calloway's home?" The girl sat up straighter, as she did when she wanted to seem more grown up. "Yes, ma'am. It's the first place since our parents died that really feels like home." "And does Mr. Calloway take good care of you and your brother?" A small smile crept onto Emily's face. "He tries really hard. Sometimes he doesn't know how to do simple stuff, like fix Noah's hair or pick out which stories are right for my age, but he learns fast." Her straightforward reply elicited discreet smiles throughout the courtroom, including from the judge. "And do you want to stay with him? Become a legal part of his family?" "More than anything in the world," Emily said, her voice firm despite the obvious emotion. "He's already our family. We just need the papers to say so." The judge watched Emily for a moment, then reviewed the documents in front of her. The silence in the room was almost tangible as everyone awaited her decision. "Considering all the reports, testimonies, and the evident well-being of the children," she finally said, "it is my decision to grant permanent guardianship of Emily and Noah Pearson to Mr. Henry Calloway, with full adoption to be finalized in 6 months, per standard probationary procedures. She tapped her gavel lightly. Congratulations to the new Calloway family. Emily sprang from her chair with a shout of joy and threw herself into Henry's arms, hugging him tightly. He embraced her back, overwhelmed by such intense emotion that he could barely breathe. Mrs. Parker approached with Noah, who, swept up in the general excitement, clapped his hands and laughed, even though he didn't fully understand what was happening. Outside the courthouse, under the gentle autumn sun, Henry allowed himself a moment to take it all in. As Emily proudly showed their guardianship papers to Wilson, waiting by the car, Henry felt a strange mix of peace and excitement. It was a new chapter, a complete beginning. "What happens now?" Emily asked as they got into the car. Henry smiled. "Now, we go home. Our home." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Calloway mansion, already transformed by the children's presence, underwent even more profound changes. One of the guest rooms was turned into a combined playroom and study space for Emily. The garden gained a small playground, constructed under Emily's enthusiastic supervision. As she insisted on sharing her opinions on every detail, Henry's schedule also adapted to the new reality. He reduced his office hours, working remotely whenever possible. Meetings that once lasted late into the night were rescheduled to more reasonable times. His priorities had changed drastically, and to his own surprise, he didn't miss his old frenetic routine at all. Mr. Yamamoto called again about that property in Tokyo, Wilson informed him one morning, as Henry had breakfast with the children. "Tell him we're sticking to our original offer," Henry replied, helping Noah with his pancakes. "If he doesn't accept by the end of the week, we walk, and postpone the video conference with London until tomorrow. I promised to take Emily to see that dinosaur exhibit this afternoon." Wilson nodded, hiding a slight smile. The new Henry Calloway, who prioritized a dinosaur exhibit over a major business meeting, still surprised everyone. "Our house is so big," Emily commented one night as Henry tucked her into bed. "Why did you live here all alone before we came?" The question caught Henry off guard. "I guess I never thought about it much. I bought this place when my company started doing really well. It seemed like the kind of house someone in my position should own. But it was very quiet, wasn't it, and empty?" Henry reflected for a moment. "Yes, it was. But I didn't realize that until you arrived." Emily gave a drowsy smile. "Then we found each other at the right time. You needed some noise, and we needed some peace. Now we have both." The simple wisdom of that child never failed to amaze him. "You're right. As always. Now get some sleep. We've got a big day tomorrow." The big day Henry referred to was a celebration he'd organized to officially introduce his new family. Nothing too extravagant, he assured Emily when she got nervous about meeting so many new people. Just a few close friends and associates who Henry felt were important enough to share this moment in his life. To his surprise, Richard Matthews was among the first to arrive. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Henry said as they helped themselves to drinks. Richard shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Well, I realized I might have been hasty in my judgment. The kids look happy. And so do you, I must admit." It was as close to an apology as Henry would get from Richard, and he accepted it with a nod. The party went smoothly, with Emily charming the guests with her intelligence and Noah winning smiles with his antics. Watching them move among the guests so comfortably in a setting that would have seemed alien just a few months earlier, Henry felt a wave of pride and gratitude. Yet it was the day after the party that life reminded him of its unpredictability. "We need to run a few more tests to confirm," said Dr. Peterson, reviewing the results of Henry's routine checkup from the week before. "But these initial markers suggest a possible serious heart condition." Henry felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. "How serious?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want to alarm you before we have a complete diagnosis. But if it's what I suspect, we're talking about a condition that will require substantial lifestyle changes. Possibly ongoing medication and sédations depending on how it progresses, even surgical procedures in the future." "Am I dying, doctor?" The question came out more directly than he intended, but Henry needed to know, Not immediately, no, the doctor said firmly. With proper care, many people with similar conditions live productive, fulfilling lives for decades. But I can't deny that this is serious, Mr. Calloway. Stress, long work hours, poor diet, all of that will have to change. Henry nodded mechanically, scheduled the additional tests, and left the office in a daze. In the car, instead of asking the driver to take him to the office as planned, he instructed him to go to the nearby park. Sitting on a bench, he watched children play under the watchful eyes of parents and nannies, and felt a kind of fear he had never experienced before. It wasn't just fear of death, though that was there too. It was the fear of not being around to see Emily grow, to help Noah become a man, to be the father he had promised them he would be. The irony did not escape him. For years, he'd avoided emotional ties, convinced attachment only led to pain. Now that he'd finally opened his heart to love again, life presented him with this new challenge. That night, after putting the children to bed, Henry retreated to his office and did something he hadn't done in a very long time. He cried. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of frustration and determination. He would not let this illness, this threat, take away the second chance life had given him. The next morning, with renewed clarity, Henry began to act. First, a meeting with his lawyer to update his will and create a trust fund for the children. Next, a thorough review of his business operations to identify areas that could be delegated or restructured. I need you to oversee the Asian operations directly, he told Jonathan, his most experienced vice president. And I want Terry to lead the European expansion instead of me. Jonathan, who had worked with Henry for nearly a decade, couldn't hide his surprise. This is unexpected. Any particular reason for the shake-up? Several reasons, Henry replied vaguely. Mainly a re-evaluation of priorities. My family responsibilities require me to be more present here. It wasn't a lie, just a partial version of the truth. Henry decided he'd only share details of his diagnosis after getting all the facts and establishing a treatment plan. He didn't want to cause unnecessary worry, especially not for the children. In the days that followed, while awaiting further test results, Henry focused on planning not only his medical treatment, but also the long-term future for his family and his business. Emily, he called one afternoon as she worked on homework in the library. Have you thought about what you'd like to do when you grow up? She looked up from her notebook, surprised by the question. I'm not sure yet. Maybe a doctor, like Noah's mom was, or a lawyer, or maybe go into business, like you. Henry smiled. You'd be excellent at any of those. Did you know I started learning about business from your grandfather when I was only a few years older than you are now? Really? Was it fun? Not always, he admitted. But it was fascinating to see how the decisions we make can build something lasting, something that helps a lot of people. Over the next few days, Henry began involving Emily in simplified discussions about his business, not in a heavy-handed or imposing way, but like an educational game. He explained basic economic concepts through everyday examples, discussed ethical dilemmas by adapting stories of real situations he'd encountered. Much to his surprise and delight, Emily absorbed it all eagerly, asking questions that showed not only intelligence, but also a sense of innate justice and responsibility. If you closed the factory to save money, what would happen to the people working there, she asked once, after Henry described a hypothetical restructuring scenario. They'd probably lose their jobs, he replied honestly. Emily frowned. And would that be fair? They didn't do anything wrong. We can't always make decisions based solely on what's fair for individuals, Henry explained. Sometimes we have to think about the greater good. But even as he said it, Henry realized how hollow it sounded. How many times had he used the greater good to justify decisions that, at heart, prioritized profit over people? Emily, with her simple yet profound perspective, made him question principles he'd treated as absolute truths his entire career. When the full diagnosis arrived, a serious but treatable heart condition requiring continuous medication, regular checkups, and, above all, a drastic reduction in stress, Henry had already started transforming not only his personal life, but also his approach to business. "I want to implement a retirement plan for employees at any factories we acquire," he announced at a board meeting, shocking everyone, "and an education fund for employees' children at every level of the company. That will have a significant impact on next quarter's profits," the CFO warned. "But a positive impact on loyalty, productivity, and our reputation in the long run," Henry countered. "Besides, that's the kind of company I want to leave as my legacy." That word, legacy, had taken on a new meaning for him. It was no longer about buildings bearing his name or amassed fortunes. It was about the impact he left on the world, the values he imparted to Emily and Noah, the example he set for them. At home, changes also continued. Henry hired a chef who specialized in healthy meals, began swimming with the children for exercise, and established regular hours for work and leisure. The mansion, once dominated by his business obsessions, now had room for board games at night, shared reading sessions, and weekends spent exploring parks, museums, and other places the children had never seen. "You seem different," Emily remarked one evening, as Henry helped her with a science project. "Different how?" "Lighter," she replied, searching for the right word. "Like you let go of something heavy." Henry considered her perceptive comment. It was true. Despite the worrying diagnosis, he felt lighter. The fear was still there, the concern for the future, but there was also new clarity and a deeper appreciation for the present. "I think I realized I've been carrying things I didn't need," he finally said, "and that what really matters is right here." That night, lying in his bed, Henry reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months. He had gone from a lonely man, obsessed with work and isolated by grief, to a father, a mentor, someone rediscovering the meaning of family and connection. The future remained uncertain. His heart condition loomed like a cloud on the horizon, but for the first time in decades, Henry did not dread tomorrow. Because now he had something to live for that went beyond contracts and acquisitions. He had Emily and Noah, a second chance, a purpose greater than himself. His mansion, once cold and silent like a mausoleum dedicated to empty ambitions, now echoed with laughter, music, the occasional argument over which movie to watch, and the sound of little feet running through the halls. It was a home. And Henry, at last, was home. 7 years had passed since that stormy night when 2 children knocked on the door of the Calloway mansion. Emily had turned 16 the month before. She was no longer the frightened little girl Henry had first met, but a confident teenager with eyes that held the same determination, now honed by knowledge and experience. Noah, at 9, was energetic and inquisitive, with an impressive talent for math and science. Though he had no memory of life before the Calloway mansion, he grew up hearing how he'd arrived there, wrapped in his sister's arms on a stormy night. Henry watched them both with pride. His hair was almost completely grey now, and the lines on his face had deepened. His heart condition, though controlled, had left its mark. He moved more slowly, but his eyes shone with a clarity missing from the frantic executive he once was. On that Saturday morning, Henry entered his home office and found Emily already at his desk, analyzing spreadsheets on the computer. "Working so early?" he asked, pouring himself some coffee. Emily looked up and smiled. "Just going over those reports from the Asian division. I think I've found some inconsistencies in the third quarter numbers." Henry raised his eyebrows. "What kind of inconsistencies?" Emily turned the monitor so he could see. "Look here. Operating expenses jumped almost 20% compared to the same period last year, with no clear explanation. And when I cross-check production data, the margins look even stranger." Henry studied the numbers, impressed not only by her observation but by the depth of her analysis. "You're absolutely right," he agreed. "I'll order a detailed audit first thing Monday." Emily nodded and resumed typing. "I've also been thinking about that expansion project in South America. I read about a local non-profit that offers technical training for underprivileged youth. We could partner with them for workforce development, creating a talent pipeline while also positively impacting the region." Henry observed her, noticing how naturally she wove social considerations into business decisions, something he himself had taken decades to begin valuing. "That's a brilliant idea, Emily. Why don't you put together a presentation for the next board meeting? You could lead this project. Her face lit up. Really? You'd let me present? I wouldn't just let you, I insist, Henry said. Emily, I think it's time we formalized your involvement in the company. What do you mean? I'm considering creating a position for you, something like Director of Social Innovation, on a part-time basis so it doesn't interfere with your studies, but it'll give you official exposure to company operations. Emily thought for a moment. But won't some directors think it's just nepotism? That I'm only there because I'm your daughter? Henry smiled. Some might, at first, but your work will speak for itself. Besides, in a family-run business, it's not uncommon for the next generation to get involved early. The next generation, Emily repeated thoughtfully. Do you want me to run the company someday? I want you to have the option, he replied honestly. If that's what you choose, yes, I'm preparing you to eventually lead the Callaway Group. But if you decide on something else, I'll respect that. Emily stood and walked to the window, watching Noah play with his new telescope in the garden. I always thought I wanted this, she said at last. Ever since I learned what you do, I found it fascinating. But in recent years, the more I learn about the company, the more I see its potential beyond profit, the impact we can have, the changes we can make. And that pushes you away from wanting to lead. Quite the opposite, she said, turning back to face him. It makes me want it even more, but not just to continue what you built. I want to transform it into something bigger. In the following weeks, Henry announced the creation of a new division in the company, Social Innovation and Sustainable Development, which would be led by Emily under his direct supervision. The board's reaction was mixed. Some veteran executives voiced concerns about Emily's youth and inexperience. Others welcomed the idea, seeing it as an opportunity to modernize. Emily's first official initiative was a partnership with non-profits in South America to provide technical training to at-risk youth. Her presentation to the board was flawless. Precise data, realistic projections, and a thorough risk-benefit analysis. The program won't just provide a skilled workforce for our local operations, she explained. It will also transform the company's relationship with the communities where we operate, from a mere resource exploiter to a partner in regional development. The project was unanimously approved, impressing even the skeptics. Over the next 4 years, Emily's involvement in the company steadily grew, balanced by her academic commitments. She graduated from college with honors and officially took on the role of Vice President of Strategy and Sustainable Development. Her initial training program in South America was so successful it became a model for similar initiatives in other regions. Under her leadership, the Social Innovation Division was no longer seen as a mere social responsibility duty, but as a strategic component of the business. Meanwhile, Noah thrived on his own path. His interest in science evolved into a focused passion for environmental technology. At 15, he developed an affordable water filtration project for communities lacking proper sanitation, receiving international recognition. When Emily turned 25, she was already a respected figure in business circles, recognized not just as Henry Callaway's daughter, but as a talented executive in her own right. It was around this time, with Henry now 70, that he started seriously considering retirement. His heart condition, though stable, was a constant reminder of his mortality. More importantly, he felt deeply fulfilled by what he had built, not just in terms of financial empire, but above all in the family he had formed. One spring morning, he called Emily into his office. I'm thinking of stepping down as president, he announced. Emily looked up, startled. Why, is your heart getting worse? No, it's stable, but I think the time has come. The company is at its strongest point in history, making it an ideal time for a transition. Who are you considering as your replacement? She asked, though she suspected the answer. Henry smiled. For you, of course. Who else could it be? Even though she'd anticipated it, Emily seemed momentarily speechless. Henry, Are you sure? I'm quite young to head a group this size. The shareholders are very pleased with the results of your initiatives, he said gently. You have the knowledge, talent, and more importantly, the vision to take the company to the next level. If I accept, will I have the freedom to make significant changes, even those that might face initial resistance. Total freedom, Henry assured her. I can keep a seat on the board if you want a safety net, but the direction will be yours to set. Emily paused in front of Sarah's portrait, which now had a place of honor on the office wall. I accept, she said finally, but on one condition. Name it. I want to create a foundation in your sister's name, the Sarah Calloway Foundation for Child Protection. It'll help kids who are in situations similar to what Noah and I went through. Henry felt a lump in his throat. I believe she would have loved that. The official announcement came at an extraordinary board meeting and, as expected, caused a stir. Most financial news outlets highlighted Emily's youth and questioned the wisdom of the decision. Some analysts predicted a drop in the company's stock. The transition ceremony was scheduled for the company's 50th anniversary, a grand event attended by business leaders, politicians, and prominent social figures. On the eve of the ceremony, Henry found Emily alone in the library, reviewing her speech. Nervous, he asked. A bit, she admitted. Not about the ceremony itself, but about the responsibility. I don't want to disappoint you, Henry. He placed his hand over hers. Emily, you've never disappointed me. From the moment you knocked on my door that stormy night, all you've brought me is pride. She smiled, her eyes shining with restrained tears. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if you'd just closed the door, if you'd done what most people would do. I wonder the same, Henry replied softly, and I thank fate every day that I didn't. The big day dawned bright. The main auditorium at Calloway Group headquarters was packed with journalists, all carefully positioned to capture this historic moment. Henry took the stage first for his farewell address. He spoke briefly about the company's trajectory, thanked partners and employees, and then came to the heart of the matter. Many have asked why I chose Emily as my successor. Some question her youth, others assume nepotism. The truth is both simpler and deeper. I chose Emily because she represents the best of what this company can be, not just a profit-making machine, but a powerful force for positive change in the world. He paused, looking at Noah in the front row, now 18 and smiling encouragingly. As I step down, the Calloway Group's fortune is greater than it has ever been. But I have discovered over these years that my true wealth has never been in financial statements or properties. It's in the family I built, the lives I've touched, and the shared moments that no amount of money can buy. Emily stepped on stage to thunderous applause. She looked poised in a navy blue suit, her brown hair swept back in a simple but elegant style. She gave Henry a long hug before taking the microphone. Her speech was concise and powerful. She presented a vision for the future, combining economic growth with social impact, innovative strategies with fundamental human values. She talked about the new Sarah Calloway Foundation, which would launch simultaneously on 3 continents to help vulnerable children. Then she touched on the personal aspect. Most of you don't know, but my journey with the Calloway Group began in an unusual way, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. On a stormy night, my brother and I knocked on Henry Calloway's door, 2 desperate orphans looking for a way to survive. A murmur rippled through the audience. This part of the family's story was known only to a select few. Henry could have done what many would do, give us a little money and close the door. But instead, he gave us a home. More than that, he gave me a future. He taught me not only about business, but about responsibility, compassion, and the power we have to make a difference in people's lives. She looked directly at Henry, who felt a mixture of pride and profound emotion. Today, as I accept this position, I make a promise. The Calloway Group will be more than a successful company. It will be an example of how business can and must be a force for social transformation, because I've learned from Henry that a person's or a company's true value isn't measured by what it accumulates, but by what it shares. The applause was deafening as Henry joined Emily on stage again for the official photo marking the transition. The moment he symbolically handed over the keys to the company was captured by dozens of cameras and would grace the covers of newspapers and magazines the next day. After the formal ceremony, there was an elegant reception in the corporate headquarters gardens. Tired of the formalities, Henry found a quiet corner to watch Emily converse with important guests. Noah found him there, carrying 2 glasses of juice. "Emily's doing great," the young man commented. "Yes, she's always known how to command a room," Henry said with a smile. "What about you? How do you feel about all this change?" Noah shrugged. "It's strange, in a good way. Emily was born for this, and you deserve some rest." Henry chuckled softly. "Rest? I'm not sure I know how." Later, when most of the guests had left, Henry walked alone in the mansion's garden. The daisies Emily had planted on that first day had multiplied, spreading through entire flower beds, resilient and vibrant, just like the girl who'd chosen them. "There you are," Emily's voice reached him. She had slipped off her high heels and walked barefoot across the grass, something she had done since she was a child. "Just getting some air," he said. "Quite a ceremony." "It was perfect," she replied, stopping beside him. Noah joined them, carrying a small box. "We almost forgot to give you this," Noah said, handing Henry the package. Inside was a silver plaque with an inscription, "For Henry Calloway, who never closed the door. With eternal love, Emily and Noah." Henry felt his eyes fill with tears. Emily moved closer and hugged him. "Thank you for never closing that door," she whispered in his ear. Henry felt a tightness in his chest, different from the pangs his heart condition sometimes caused. This was the tightness of pure fulfillment, of deep gratitude for how life had turned out. The soaking wet little girl who had once knocked on his door, clutching an old rag and protecting a baby, was now a strong young woman about to lead an empire. The shivering infant was now a brilliant young man with an unlimited future. And he, who once thought his life revolved solely around contracts, acquisitions, and financial statements, had discovered that true wealth was never in business, but in the love and human connection he'd found when he least expected it. "I think it's me who should be thanking you," Henry replied, holding tight to the 2 young people who had become the center of his world. "You've given me far more than I could ever repay." As he watched the sunset over the garden, with Emily and Noah by his side, Henry felt a peace he had sought his entire life without knowing. The circle was complete, his legacy secure, and the journey, though different from anything he had ever imagined, had been infinitely richer and more meaningful than his most ambitious dreams. That stormy night had brought more than 2 helpless children to his door. It had brought him a second chance, a path to redemption, and the most valuable lesson Henry Calloway would ever learn: that real success is not measured by what you gain, but by what you share, not by what you accumulate, but by what you give, not by the walls you build, but by the doors you keep open. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.